Hi, everybody. Welcome to another WISTA UK event. We're very pleased to welcome everybody here today on this very interesting topic of maritime security and privacy, of course. Just to inform everybody, a few operational housekeeping kind of things, we will be recording this session. So just keep that in mind with your cameras, and we will be using it in our social media. So the video will be uploaded to our social media. Please do let us know if you have any issues with that. Please do keep your mic muted throughout the session, and we will be taking questions and answers at the end of today's event. So I'm Gina, I'm on the events committee of WISTA UK, and joining me today in this very interesting discussion is, of course, Sarah Knight and Shannon Skimming, who are both analysts at Dryad Global. Welcome to our panel, ladies.
Thanks for having us, Gina.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much for joining us today to guide us through the annual report of Dryad Global, and of course discuss some of the trends and topics around maritime security and privacy, some kidnap statistics, and much more, which I'm sure you're much more capable of discussing than me. So without further ado, I'll hand the platform over to you. And as I mentioned, for anybody who has any questions throughout, you can share them in the chat or Q&A or raise your hand, but we will be answering them at the end. So ladies, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. I'll just pull up my slides. So hi, everyone, and thank you, Gina, for having Shannon and I here today to talk you through some maritime security trends we've been seeing and mitigation strategies. We're really excited as women in shipping and women in security to be speaking with WISTA today. And so I'll just be taking you guys through Dryad Global's annual report. And just before we get started, if anybody would like to download a copy of the report, it's available on our website, and we'll also share these slides with Gina so that she can distribute this link if anybody would like to download a copy.
Excellent. We'll make sure we also share it on our social media pages, Sarah. Thank you.
Fantastic. So just getting started, what are we talking about when we talk about maritime security? Well, whilst it is concentrated in certain regions, it's a global issue. The three regions that we focus on at Dryad Global are West Africa, the Indian Ocean, and Southeast Asia. We focus on these regions as the bulk of global shipping transits through these areas. It's where we see the greatest fidelity of data, and they are the most significant areas for maritime security and their potential impact on commercial operations. So the map on the left shows incident clusters in these three key regions, but we're also seeing lower volumes of maritime crime in other areas such as Central America, the Caribbean, South America, East Africa, and off India's coastline. And just for clarity at the start, I know some people will be aware of this and some people might not, but the definition of maritime crime is any incident within a state's territorial waters, so within 12 nautical miles, whereas piracy is crime in international waters, so that is beyond the 12 nautical mile limit. It's clear from both the map on the left and the graph on the right that West Africa is the global heartland of modern piracy and maritime crime, which is in stark contrast to a decade ago when the Indian Ocean was the key region. Our incident analysis at Dryad Global is also attuned to where within these larger geographic regions the incidents are occurring and the severity and success rates of these incidents. So the first region that we're going to look at today is very appropriately West Africa, as I just stated, heartland of modern piracy and maritime crime. On this slide, we're looking at the quantity of incidents in West Africa. We can see clearly that this region experiences the full scope, the full gambit of piracy and maritime crime. There are high volumes of all types of maritime crime. However, these various incidents are not all perpetrated necessarily by the same people. For example, the people climbing moorings to steal tins of paint at port aren't necessarily the same people hijacking vessels and kidnapping 15 crew 200 nautical miles out to sea. We also focus on the location of incidents as depicted in this graphic, this map that we have up. West Africa is a massive geographic area that stretches along 6,000 kilometers of coastline. So low-level maritime crime, often boardings at anchor and in port for robbery, is pervasive throughout this region, throughout West Africa. Piracy, however, is localized almost exclusively within the Gulf of Guinea, which is what's depicted on screen. And we can actually get even more specific than that. Almost all piracy operations are based out of the southern Niger Delta. This is where pirates take any crew unfortunate enough to be kidnapped. And it's an incredibly dense mangroves and marshland that's almost like a labyrinth. And once pirates manage to get the hostages back to the southern Niger Delta, authorities have pretty much no hope of being able to track them down. They move them around, and that's when that ransom discussion process comes into place. So when we're talking about piracy, in short, and maritime crime in West Africa, it's important to understand this geographical nuance. So the two most prominent incident types, as depicted on the graphics on the top left bar graph, sorry, are robbery and kidnapping, which are both financially motivated, but obviously vary drastically in their severity. We're seeing a significant volume of kidnappings, both in number of separate incidents and number of kidnapped crew. The media talks about an exponential increase in kidnapping, and whilst we can see an increase since 2017, since 2019, kidnapping statistics have remained pretty consistent. And if you look at the individuals kidnapped in the 2018, it's a pretty consistent flat line. In 2021, we have already seen almost 40% of 2020's kidnapping numbers in less than 20% of the incidents. So it remains to be seen whether pirate action groups are going to persist at this rate throughout the year, and we're going to see numbers similar to 2020 and 2019, or we'll see something similar or reminiscent of earlier years. So another important aspect of understanding piracy and maritime crime in West Africa is the actual nature of these incidents. More than 3/4 of incidents occurring in West Africa are likely to have a tangible commercial impact on vessel operations. The fact that the vast majority of incidents are severe is a symptom of systemic problems on shore. Piracy and maritime crime is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end, and is financially motivated. So factors such as poverty, corruption, weak institutions and governance, and limited resources dedicated to counter piracy all perpetuate this issue and can create a sort of self-perpetuating cycle. So the pie graph on the right then looks at the outcomes of all incidents in West Africa. And I just want to make a really important distinction in these stats. We're not going off what a pirate would deem a success, which would be kidnapping crew for ransom. We're calling any incident which reasonably endangered the safety and security of the vessel or crew a success. So we at Dryad Global are defining a successful incident as boardings, kidnappings, hijackings, or if a vessel is attacked or fired upon. So it's anything that puts the vessel or crew at risk or breaches the security of the vessel superstructure, not just whether somebody was kidnapped. So then failures are approaches or attempted boardings. We're also seeing that pirates are successful 2/3 of the time when conducting operations and attacks offshore. So what do these numbers mean? It means that pirates are operating in the Gulf of Guinea at an incredibly high degree of capability and intent, with potential impacts to your operations spiking sharply when trading through this region. The next region that we're going to look at is the Indian Ocean, which continues to be an area of serious interest to those concerned with maritime security. Note that I did not say piracy. That's because the nature of maritime crime in this region has changed dramatically in the last decade. The contemporary story of the Indian Ocean is one of geopolitical instability and traditional war risk. This is not to say that piracy is no longer a concern at all. However, in light of the significant commercial impact that the likes of the Joint War Committee high-risk areas, armed guards, and anti-piracy measures have on operations, it's important that we view the utility of these measures in light of the actual risk and the nature of threat in this region. So the graph on the left is a numerical overview, and it shows that there is far less variety of reported incidents at a far lower volume in this region to West Africa, which we just looked at. So when we compare these to the graph on the right, which gives an overview of the last 4 years, we can see that there has been a significant decline overall. Total incidents were up last year from 2019, but down overall from 2017. And if we go back even further, go back a decade, 645 crew members were taken in 2010 and more than 550 in 2011 by Somali pirates. Last year, there were no incidents of kidnapping or hijacking by pirates in the Indian Ocean, with the last confirmed hijacking by Somali pirates recorded in 2017. So how then are we accounting for this increase in incidents in 2020? We again look at the breakdown. There has been an increase in approaches and incidents classified as attacks and boardings. However, these incidents include the activities in the Gulf of Oman, which involve the Saudi Arabian Navy and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which are not piratical in nature. The incidents that are synonymous with maritime piracy are the ones that I've listed. So piracy, maritime crime, sorry. So it's piracy, war risk, illicit trading, illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing and trafficking and migration. And like we talked about with West Africa, it's important to understand specific locations where different kinds of incidents occur. And in doing so, this information can tell its own story and really allow you to understand the nature of risk and threat. So as you will have all noticed, the majority of headlines coming out of the Indian Ocean are predominantly to do with similar themes of geopolitical instability and war risk. Notably, this is seen in the likes of Israel and Iran tit-for-tat actions, Iranian naval harassment of commercial vessels in the Middle Eastern Gulf, and we are also seeing a continuation of the war in Yemen and the Iranian sponsoring of Houthi proxies there, and of course, the recent and pertinent insurgency in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado region. And I actually just want to touch on the fact that earlier this week, the Joint War Committee revised the high-risk area delineations in the Indian Ocean, which is this red box reflected on screen. So the JWC 026 has reduced the maritime offshore area covered, with offshore Kenya no longer included except for where its territorial waters and immediate offshore area borders on Somalia's, which is that disputed maritime region. It still includes offshore Somalia and includes the Gulf of Oman and the Middle Eastern Gulf, and has also been updated to include 50 nautical miles off Tanzania and Mozambique around the Cabo Delgado region, which is in response to the recent insurgency, which saw the first real hijacking incident in the Indian Ocean in the last 18 months, which occurred in March this year. So these changes are in response to the dynamic, ever-evolving risk environment in the Indian Ocean. So whilst geopolitical incidents are the most prevalent and significant for commercial impact in the Indian Ocean, they only account for roughly 40% of overall incidents. Almost 2/3 of incidents in the Indian Ocean are classified as non-determined. Most of these non-determined incidents are suspicious approaches, which can be that illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing in the region, migrant traffic or military activity. If we compare these incidents to what we see in regions where piracy is proven, we see a fundamental lack of evidence that would indicate a persistent threat from piracy. For example, we don't have attempted boardings, vessels being fired upon. We rarely have confirmed sightings of weapons and ladders in vessels that aren't affiliated with the IRGC, and we rarely have consistent approaches and attempts to board commercial vessels. Now, even though I just said that piracy is virtually non-existent in the Indian Ocean, we at Dryad Global do see a number of significant red flags in the likes of Somalia, Eritrea, particularly around the withdrawal of foreign aid, decreased stability, and the persistence of viable offshore targets. Somalia especially is still a deeply fragile state. This paired with increasing international oil company prospecting off its coast could potentially create a perfect storm that could see the return to piracy off Somalia. The third region that we're going to cover today is Southeast Asia. Again, when talking about Southeast Asia, we're talking about a massive geographic region that goes from where Vietnam borders on China down through the Sulu and Celebes Sea to Singapore and Indonesia. As seen in 2020's numbers and each year prior, which is that bar graph on the bottom left there, we are seeing an overwhelming demonstrable trend of low-level maritime crime. So this is particularly boardings at anchor and at port for purpose of threat, which is far and away the most prevalent commercial risk to vessels operating in this region. The vast majority of these occur in the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, which is this cluster of incidents here, which is the heartland of maritime crime in Southeast Asia. This is because the straits see a confluence of factors, which is density of targets combined with significant poverty throughout coastal communities in Indonesia and a very narrow geographic corridor, which all provides an ample opportunity for low-level maritime crime, again, mostly robbery. The other hotspot in Southeast Asia is Manila in the Philippines, which is up to the top right here. And there was one incident of crew being kidnapped in the Sulu and Celebes in January 2020. This was, however, an isolated incident and is not indicative of the prevalent pattern of maritime crime in this region today. So whilst the three regions that I've covered already are the ones that we focus on for the reasons that I mentioned at the start, particularly fidelity of data, I do still want to touch on the last region we're going to speak about today, which is Latin America and the Gulf of Mexico. So what's similar about this region to others that we've looked at? Again, poverty is the main motive for maritime crime in this region. Venezuela has been under US sanctions since 2017, with specific sanctions deliberately targeting oil operations to prevent government corruption and exploitation of these resources. And as sanctions pretty much always do, they have had unintended consequences for local populations, people on the bottom rung of the economic ladder, not just the elites that they were designed to punish. So economic contraction, partially from sanctions, partially from COVID, partially from poor governance, has had a direct impact on the local population in coastal communities. Guayaquil in Ecuador, which is this cluster of incidents right here, is also a location where we are seeing a serious risk posed to commercial operations. So on March 6th this year, we saw assailants approach and board a vessel 10 nautical miles south of Guayaquil, where they took a crew member hostage and opened 9 containers, managing to steal cargo and escape. This was an unusually serious attack for this region and showed to us that the assailants in this region are incredibly confident and both confident and effective, essentially. So political instability is pervasive throughout Latin America, which is something I think most of us are cognizant of, which coupled with socioeconomic inequality drives maritime crime and piracy. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, there is little reliable data for us to fully and comprehensively understand this region. When talking about the Gulf of Mexico, we see a similar situation. It is complicated in that we believe current rates of piracy and maritime crime in the Gulf are misrepresentative due to underreporting. We see hundreds of locally reported piracy incidents that are just not officially confirmed. Once again, we want to be as specific as possible about the nature of threat when looking at maritime crime in a region. The vast majority of serious incidents is in the Bay of Campeche, which is in the top left of the map, where you can see this cluster of incidents here. We're seeing incidents anywhere from 5 to 100 nautical miles from shore, and these incidents are often notably violent. Perpetrators are heavily armed, sometimes even with assault rifles, and have proven that they have both the capability and intent to use violence as a means of intimidation. At the moment, they're mostly targeting vessels with a low freeboard, fishing vessels, offshore supply vessels, and tugboats. This indicates that whilst these are still serious incidents, there's still an opportunistic element at play. Now, you may be thinking, does this trend have anything to do with the drug cartels in Central and South America? I know that's where my mind went first, and that is how most people generally understand organized crime and violent crime in this region. Whilst, as I said, it's not the most reliable region for data, from what we can see, the perpetrators are coming from local maritime communities with their own grievances and actually have no connection to cartel activity. So that is my run through, my debrief of Dryad Global's most recent annual report. What are the key themes? If you've got grievances, poverty, and opportunity in coastal communities, you're likely to see incidents of piracy and maritime crime. This varies in severity, and the kinds of piracy and crime we see are geostrategically specific. We have to remember that piracy and maritime crime are much more varied and nuanced than you might initially think. And to really understand maritime security and the nature of risk that's posed to vessels just trying to get from point A to point B, it's really important to grasp this nuance. So from there, I will hand it over to my colleague, Shannon. I just think you're on mute, Gina.
Yes, I am, and that would be helpful. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting to see. Just wanted to remind everybody that if they have any questions, they can put them through in the chat, and we'll be taking them at the end of this session. Shannon, the floor is all yours.
Hi, thanks, Gina. I just wanted to start off with we're really excited to be on here speaking with all of you today. So thank you for having us. So I'm Shannon. I'm an analyst with Dryad Global. My main area of responsibility is the online geospatial Atlas Inform platform, as well as monitoring and reporting on Libya. So I'm going to be presenting on pre-transit due diligence and why this is really important to maritime security. So this quote I just want to start with this quote at the top of the screen here. It really serves to highlight that simply because most people take a course of action, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right course of action. It's really instead the value of lived and tested experience by experts with specific industry experience is vital when you're looking to make decisions. The aim of this presentation is mainly to cover the requirements and processes that underpin the need to conduct due diligence when trading within complex environments. So at Dryad Global, we aim to provide a relatively outside perspective to the maritime industry. And this is principally born of the fact that we're not an armed guard company. Instead, we're a bespoke information provider, focusing on the delivery of impartial reporting, regardless of the nature and severity of risk. And we serve our clients through the use of intelligence across all areas where it's required, present relevant information on what's happening and where in complex environments, and then put that into context of how it might affect our clients. This then enables more informed decision-making on how to mitigate risk and where these mitigations are necessary to safeguard their interests, as well as assisting companies in meeting regulatory, commercial, and corporate requirements vis-a-vis the safety of vessel and crew. So for the purpose of this presentation, I'm just going to break down the process of pre-transit due diligence into its simplest form. So please forgive me if you do work in security and this comes across as oversimplified, but we have a wide range of people joining us from the maritime industry tonight, and I didn't want to leave anyone behind in illustrating the necessity of such actions or their ramifications if they're not done correctly. So we'll just begin by focusing on the why, looking at the background motivations for pre-transit due diligence, both at a corporate and a consequential level. I'll then move on to focus on the where, looking at the definition of complex environments and where these are to be found. Followed by the what, covering some of the key features of complex environments, particularly how this is manifested in different areas of the world. And these 2 points feed back a bit into Sarah's presentation before. And finally, looking at the how and the when, summarizing some of the key aspects that can be taken and where these are likely to be required. So in looking at the why, the first point to make here is that there is clearly defined legislative framework that mandates the need for mariners to be protected at sea. At a base level, these are laid down in UNCLOS, SOLAS Chapter 11, Section 2, and the ISPS Code. With regard to SOLAS, Part A is considered mandatory and outlines detailed maritime and port security related requirements, which SOLAS contracting governments, port authorities and shipping companies have to adhere to in order to be considered compliant with the code. Part B then provides a series of recommendatory guidelines on how to meet these requirements and obligations that are laid out in Part A. With regard to the ISPS code, this was connived and implemented in response to the perceived increase in terrorism risk post 9/11. And again, we see regulatory guidance designed to enhance the safety of mariners and vessels, regardless of environmental risk. As vessel owners, charterers, and technical managers, we have a corporate responsibility to safeguard the personnel and assets under our control, and that's further reinforced at a legal level. Commercial imperatives are pretty clear, as are the requirements of P&I and flag states. And second to last, we have, thankfully, in shipping, a culture of security. Whilst this isn't always perfect, we have over the past few years seen a number of documents specifically published to drive home the need for adequate security measures to ensure appropriate and comprehensive measures are taken to protect mariners and vessels alike. And a couple of these can be seen in the pictures on the screen. And finally, the most obvious, I guess, imperative is illustrated through the human costs and the very real impacts of failing to adequately take measures to mitigate potential issues. And this is where we draw the distinction between legislative, regulatory, and moral requirements. It is worth remembering, however, that whilst a lot can be done to mitigate issues, others are simply unavoidable. In relation to piracy, for example, as we saw in Sarah's presentation, since January 2020, in the Gulf of Guinea, there's been 31 kidnapping incidents, resulting in the kidnap of 187 personnel. Whilst many of us can be working in the analytical side, we can often become removed from the realities of the things we report. In looking at the startling numbers of crews kidnapped in the Gulf of Guinea, it's easy to see that the risk for mariners is very real. In the Middle Eastern Gulf and the Mediterranean since February 2021, we've seen 5 vessels suffering explosions and significant damage as a result of Iranian and Israeli ongoing tit-for-tat strikes. In the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, we see regular reporting of incidents related to the ongoing conflict in Yemen. Specifically, we see repeated attempts by Houthi rebels to impact Saudi commercial interests by targeting vessels and infrastructure through the use of waterborne IEDs, rockets, and drone strikes. In Libya, we see a sudden, often unpredictable implementation of force majeure and occasional vessel detentions, as well as ongoing involvement of proxy states fueling the conflict on both sides. And most recently, we see the insurgency in Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, placing considerable pressure on significant offshore projects. So the question as to where pre-transit due diligence is required is essential for understanding how we take measures to protect vessel and crew. Further still, it's vitally important, given the considerable financial impact of protecting vessels and crew, that it's not only done for the right reasons, but it's done in the right places. So there's a number of organizations and documents now that attempt to assist the global shipping community in understanding where these risks lie, particularly in the form of joint war risk committees, risk areas, and the Maritime HRA in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Guinea. Fundamentally, we advocate for the securitization of vessel and crew through due diligence whenever operations are going to be conducted in what we'd term a complex environment. I know that term can sound very generic. To give a little bit more specificity, we'd define it as any environment where there's a high risk of negative impact resulting from an event that compromises vessel or crew safety. So in looking to apply this for the purpose of practical application, there'd be 3 distinct areas that we would see this risk being grouped, and those are in transit, in port, and onshore during the conduct of shore leave and crew transfer. So having defined the impetus and areas where these requirements are found, it's vital that we understand some of the key features of complex environments that vessels may face, and to explore how significantly these can differ, ultimately while still having a fairly similar commercial impact. Piracy, of course, is one of the most significant problems facing mariners the world over. It is vital to understand the true nature of piracy and how this impacts the potential transit being planned. For example, it's a misconception that kidnap and hijack are common features of piracy the world over. As we saw in Sarah's slides, there's certainly features within the Gulf of Guinea, but significantly less so in areas like Southeast Asia, where there remains a high volume of incidents, but the nature of these are fundamentally different from those that are occurring in the Gulf of Guinea. If we look at the geopolitical instability, this is something we see most prevalent in the Middle Eastern Gulf. Yet there's a significant number of companies that continue to spend vast sums of money seeking to mitigate from piracy, without taking measures to mitigate from the principal risks facing vessels in that region in the form of war risk and geopolitical instability. Now, in this case, we accept entirely that it's very tempting to seek to mitigate tangible risks such as piracy over ill-defined risk like geopolitical instability. And indeed, when piracy is the risk that's present, that's absolutely the right thing to do. But with significant commercial impacts of security mitigation over time, it is really essential that the right decisions are taken in light of the most pertinent risks. Far too often, we see companies defaulting risk-based decisions only to those areas where there's a mandated requirement for mitigation. So most commonly, we see this in the Joint War Risk Committee areas. And while these are certainly relevant and do a very good job of illustrating the geographical nature of risk, it's important to understand their limitations. So prior to the recent changes in the Indian Ocean HRA brought about by the Joint War Committee's 026 amended areas, the Indian Ocean HRA included Kenya as an area of high maritime risk and extended the high risk area out to a distance of approximately 500 nautical miles offshore Somalia. In the case of JWC 025 HRA in the Gulf of Guinea, this is again shown to have limitations. We've had 3 incidents outside of this Gulf of Guinea HRA so far in 2021. In addition, those areas that we have mentioned before often see rapidly evolving threats that develop in these areas that aren't covered by the JWC. So until Monday, as prime example is Monday, prior to Monday this week, there's a particularly acute case of this with Mozambique, where we'd seen considerable instability within the Cabo Delgado region for some time. Yet it was only added as a high-risk area following the serious attack in the port town of Palma. So we come to the how, having established the basis for pre-transit due diligence, and indeed where and what, it's important to look at how we can achieve it. So for the purpose of simplicity, I've broken this down into 4 stages: understand, plan, mitigate, learn, and review. So I probably should have made this into a cycle, as it's a never-ending process and really should be undertaken every transit. The bottom line is that it's vital to fully understand the nature of your operations and where the risk lies. So there's no point, as I said before, in protecting against piracy when the risk is geopolitical. Likewise, there's no point in failing to take anti-piracy measures if the risk indicators are that there is a significant risk facing vessels and crew. So this is an area which Dryad Global specializes in, and it's what we work with our commercial partners to ensure holistic understanding of risk. And we do that through a range of products that support short-term practical decision-making, as well as long-term strategic insights. Principally, we find ourselves providing a range of services to support our clients in the understand phase, from our online interactive system Atlas Inform to a range of risk assessments, including transit, port, and country risk assessments. At the heart of these is a need by the client to fully understand the specific nature of risk from an impartial and independent source. In line with this impartiality, we also provide intelligence support to a number of PMSCs who seek to enhance their offering by partnering with Dryad as an independent partner in order to provide risk-based reporting without any accusation of being artificially invested in high-risk reporting. As the market continues to evolve in that space, the nature of risk is becoming ever more dynamic, and we see a rapid increase in the number of companies seeking independent security advice from which they can make mitigation decisions. Now, when we come to the plan stage, I guess there's 2 phrases that we hear a lot in the office at Dryad that I think apply to this quite well. One's taken from the diving world, and it goes plan the dive and dive the plan. A second of which would be used by my ex-military colleagues, and they say that no plan survives first contact. So the essence of which I want you to take away is that it's essential to have a plan in the first place. And this really applies to pre-transit due diligence. In our extensive experience, we've seen within clients a temptation often brought about by time and commercial pressures to go straight to the mitigate phase. But in order for that to be fully effective, it is really important that plans are made for contingencies in case some of these mitigations do fail. How this can look is ensuring that in the case of kidnap and hijack, all parts of the business from security to commercial, comms and HR are all familiar with the company plan for worst case scenario. And the same goes for war risk damage or situation of geopolitical instability, where information can be really confusing or contradictory. And it's just as vital to understand the courses of action that might take place in that situation. In all cases, the planning phase should involve as many external actors as possible, and those that will be required in the unlikely event of emergency. So while this particular phase is impractical to conduct for every single transit, it should certainly form the basis of which companies are looking to make decisions within a complex, decisions to trade within a complex environment. When we get to the fourth point on that slide there, mitigate and protect, at Dryad Global, we're not at the front end of the mitigation. We work with our clients to ensure that mitigations are commensurate with the risks that they're going to be facing, and to understand the utility and the limitations of those. So we do that in two ways. The first of this is found back in the understand phase, and that's following the process of risk assessment. We would make a series of potential recommendations that the client might wish to consider. And then throughout the client's implementation of these mitigations, Dryad supports this with continual update of information and context, and that allows for constant reevaluation of decisions to ensure that all these mitigations and information that's being utilized remains relevant. A really good example of this can be found following the 2019 attacks offshore of the Fujairah anchorage, at a time of heightened Iranian tensions with the US. At that time, there was a general feeling of impetus within the market in terms of mitigation options for vessels transiting an area of heightened geopolitical sensitivity, where it seemed like tankers were being targeted indiscriminately. So one solution that was offered by a number of companies was the employment of unarmed security advisors. And while this is a form of mitigation that can have a number of benefits, specifically for providing increased security capacity and unburdening the vessel master, this seemingly benign mitigation can also have limitations and potential consequences. We worked with a number of clients at this time to understand the benefits of employing armed security advisors to mitigate the potential for enhanced Iranian interference in a sensitive area. So in this case, there are a number of vessels through the nature of flag and ownership or other details that we ultimately advised might be placing themselves at heightened risk of Iranian interference and attention because of employing security personnel who are often ex-military and non-organic to the vessel or company. The second way that we support the mitigate and protect phase is by partnering with mitigation experts such as PMSC armed guard companies that with exceptional standards and reputation, as well as companies providing equipment solutions. So by offering our clients access to the best market providers in any area, then we can help to ensure that their interests are well protected. For the companies not working with Dryad, the key aspect of protection and mitigation remains the need to conduct due diligence on and with any company that you'd intend to work with. And this is particularly vital when employing armed guards. Thankfully, there's still a high number of high quality armed guard providers in an ever evolving and increasingly competitive market space. And I know some of you are probably in the audience today. Oh, sorry. It's too far ahead. So the final step here is the need to learn and review. So it's important that at a corporate level within security departments that there's a culture of learning and accountability without fear of persecution. So just because we sailed through a certain area currently without armed guards doesn't mean that that was necessarily the right thing to do. On the same note, having a blanket policy of taking armed guards on every single transit with its associated financial impact, or any other hardware mitigation for that matter, doesn't necessarily mean that was the right course of action either. So we're constantly returning to that understand phase to ensure that we're learning from any and all new information, and that you receive your information from an independent source that are able to report impartially. So just to recap, for the reasons we discussed earlier, it is essential that you always undertake the understand, the plan, and the learn steps every single transit. And through that process, we can then ensure that the mitigation is undertaken the right way at the right time. And by using independent sources throughout this process of pre-transit due diligence, it just ensures that the relevancy, the accuracy, and the meaning of the information that's presented best serves the protection of our crews and vessels. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shannon. And I think we've already got a few questions that have been coming in from the audience, but maybe if you could put on the slide the download link or share it in the chat for the report, so anybody who would like to download it in the meantime. And we'll be taking Q&A, so you can also unmute yourself, raise your hand, and ask your questions in this last 10-15 minutes. I think the ladies have briefed us in quite comprehensively on both aspects of this very interesting topic. Going on to the questions now, the first one that came in is for Sarah. I think Francisco here needs some clarifications on the 5 kidnaps, he says, you mentioned in the Gulf of Guinea in your presentation. I don't know if there's something you have available or would like to share some thoughts with him.
Yeah, I don't have that data available like at my fingertips right now, but I will also drop my email in the chat box. And Francisco, if you just want to send me an email, and I'm happy to like look at the data properly and then clear that up for you.
Excellent. Then we have Shannon. Did you want to add something to that?
I was just going to say some of the maps that we have in the annual report do display some of that data with date stamps alongside all of the points. And as Sarah mentioned, we can provide additional detail to that. We just don't have that all here with us right now.
Yeah, perfect. So maybe if you both, yeah, excellent. Drop your emails in the chat and then they can reach out to you for any further data and facts on that. The next question we have is from Eric. How have the coastal states pivoted in past year to support with regards to maritime security and privacy during a pandemic? I don't know if either of you would like to share, or both of you would like to share some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so the thing about looking at the pandemic and how it's impacted piracy, we've obviously seen states the world over preoccupied with dealing with the pandemic on shore and dealing with how that is playing out in communities. We often see, and this is not just in times of pandemic, we often see what we call sea blindness, where states are more concentrated on dealing with things that are happening on shore than things that are occurring in their territorial waters or beyond. Sorry, getting tongue-tied. We've also seen that pirates have not been impacted, they've not seen the pandemic as an excuse to be less active. And we've, like the stats that I showed are similar in 2020, especially in regards to kidnappings, to what we saw in 2019. We did not find that the pandemic prevented or exacerbated pirate activity. What we would recommend, what we've seen, is minimizing the number of extraneous crew and people on vessels, but vessels, especially passing through the Gulf of Guinea, are still boarding armed guards and escorts and things like that. So the pandemic has not been something that has played a massive factor, and it certainly hasn't sort of carried over. I'm not sure if Shannon has something else to say to that.
Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that I think we're all quite aware that this pandemic is probably going to have flow-on effects that we see for quite a long time to come. So it would definitely be something worth monitoring to see whether this flow-on effect, whether this starts to see an increase in crime and other activities further down the line as a result of what's happening at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks, ladies, for that. Our next question is from Rod. He's saying, of course, that was excellent, which is great. We're glad you enjoyed it. It was indeed. Regarding a solution to the complex Gulf of Guinea piracy issue, there seems to be a lot of talk and not much, sorry, just my chat mode, not much effective action. Other than Denmark sending, just a second, a frigate, how do you, the chat keeps on moving us. How do you see this being resolved in the short to medium term? The question is in the chat, of course. Ladies, would you like to share your thoughts on Rod's question there?
Yeah, Rod, it's interesting you bring that up. We've been talking about that among us in the office over the past week, because there was actually recently a white paper put out talking about, it is the Gulf of Guinea Maritime Collaboration Forum, which is a partnership between NMASA and the Yaoundé Charter. Sorry for butchering that. I know that we have Nigerian nationals in the audience. But yeah, we've noticed that as well, that there is a lot of talk and a lot of commitments made, a lot of rhetoric, and then it's not met with much action, which again can be put down to what I mentioned before, that sea blindness. Nigeria is dealing with terrorism up on its northern borders, in its northern regions. Piracy is a very complex issue to deal with, and it's not always the priority. This forum that they're bringing together is all about multilateral cooperation, which we have been saying is what needs to happen to deal with a complex issue, and pirates don't particularly care about maritime borders, apart from the fact that they know that there is going to be less of a security presence beyond territorial waters. For what you say, how do I see this being resolved in the short to medium term? It's really going to be whether that communication, that interoperability, information sharing, territorial, the issue with dealing with piracy in Nigeria is these issues of sovereign areas and territorial waters, and whether we can see real integrated multilateral cooperation, which there has been talks of, nothing yet, but of course, hearing a white paper talking about that and committing to that again, that would be the way forward, I think.
Thank you, Sarah. Shannon, do you have anything to add on that?
I think Sarah's covered that off pretty well.
Okay, excellent. Hope, Rod, we've covered your question. And going on to the next question that came through from Sunday, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. My question is on the Gulf of Guinea, where the government of the day is overwhelmed with political instability, leaving our maritime security open and vulnerable. An example is here in Nigeria. What would you advise ships bringing goods through the Gulf of Guinea to Nigeria or other countries in the region?
Shannon, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So that one feeds a lot into what I sort of discussed, and that would be the pre-transit due diligence. So understanding where the risks lie, what the options are to mitigate that, as well as being able to look at the data and see where trends are happening, as well as other measures such as vessel parameters that are increasing vessel susceptibility, and then other instances like threat warnings from watchkeepers, and those sort of notifications, being able to monitor those and maintain awareness of all of the information that is available in the event that you are transiting through that. The more aware you are, I think, is the best mitigation at the moment, as well as vessel hardening measures and securities, as is mentioned in the BMP5. As sort of followed on from Rod's question earlier, it remains to be seen how this is going to play out, particularly from Nigeria, whether we can get that interoperability or not. We've seen recent incidents where a vessel's been reported sighted, but it's crossed over territorial waters, and then it's taken hours for a response to be coordinated and locate the vessel. And yeah, there's still work to be done there, keeping your awareness and pre-transit due diligence, and any mitigations that can be undertaken are the best route at the moment that I can.
Perfect, thank you. Next question is excellent again, Sarah and Shannon. From Julio, my question is, do you expect the latest developments north of Mozambique will take out to sea and endanger navigation through the channel of Mozambique? Thank you, stay safe and healthy. Who would like to take that one? And then I think we've got a couple of more and we'll wrap up this session.
I think Shannon's got that one as well.
So we talked about this a little bit in a recent post on our Channel 16 blog. If you want to go on to there for a little bit more detail than I can cover quickly in a response here. It is an excellent question at the moment. We've seen a few similarities that we can draw with Somali insurgency, as well as Boko Haram operations in Nigeria in their ability to control territory, as well as Mozambique security response, similarities to the Nigerian security response, in that they're primarily being preoccupied by these issues onshore, both with the insurgency as well as the flow-on effects from that, with mass displacement of persons from the region, which is leading to a lack of focus on the offshore side of things, with a high amount of operations still present offshore there, as well as vessels transiting through. I think there's definitely demonstrated capability for them to operate offshore. A couple of years back now, they attacked and sank a Mozambique security vessel offshore. And then there's been a similar incident with security incident with a vessel during the attack on Palma. So there's definitely capability for that to spread offshore, whether that then comes from the insurgency itself moving offshore, or whether that's from local coastal communities that have been affected by both the insurgency and economic effects, moving to piracy, similar to what we've seen in Nigeria and in Somalia back when that first started.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shannon, for that. And then we also had a follow-up question on rods, or a couple of questions in one. What should shipping companies themselves do to assist, particularly of Gulf of Guinea? Second question, if allowed, what measures liaison is being taken by the FCDO to help increase maritime awareness, SA measures there? And then we have one final question. And I might need to log off. I'm sorry, because I have another engagement, but Sue will be happily taking over. She just found out in case I need to take the last question. So ladies, would one of you like to answer these two questions by Tom here?
Yeah, I can give them a go. So to answer your first question, it does play into what Shannon was talking about, really. It's that due diligence and having just visible hardening measures on those vessels, which is going to be how the number one way to deter pirates. Obviously, they are, whilst there is a high degree of capability and intent, they're still going to pick the softest target. So we talk about a layering approach to security. So it's deter, delay, and then protect. So it's that vessel hardening that is going to ultimately you don't want pirates approaching or trying to board your vessel, so you want to make it as visibly hardened as possible. And that's also doing the due diligence, getting the risk assessments, understanding the nature of risk running through that area. And then it's delay. So you can have something like barbed wire, anti-climb barriers, protecting internal compartments, and trailing nets behind, reducing maneuverability and speed of any vessels trying to come up. And then finally, it's protect. It's that citadel, those hardening measures there, just to make sure that you are protecting the crew, because ultimately under SOLAS and just under due diligence and care, it's protecting the crew first and foremost, and making sure that nobody is taken. To address your second question, obviously the FCDO has MDAT-GOG, which is looking at, which is run by UK MTO, the Royal Navy, and the French Navy. And it's all about information sharing and awareness. So that's getting vessels to report when they sight suspicious approaches and things like that. So that's just increasing awareness. But most vessels going through the Gulf of Guinea, it's been a hotspot, a piracy hotspot, a maritime hotspot for a while. So there is a level of awareness that exists.
Right, thanks, Sarah. We've got one more question that's come in from Christopher. The Deep Blue project assets are coming online and currently being used in the secure anchorage in Lagos. Do you think they will have an impact further offshore in time?
I think they could. There's particularly talk about using the Air Force aspects of the Deep Blue project to help with monitoring and awareness of incidents and response to incidents. That will just remain to sort of be seen, and that project's been delayed a few times now. But it is great that it's coming on board, and it's a very good start. I think that would definitely feed into the need for collaboration with the likes of the Danish Navy that's present there at the moment, as well as other naval countries that are present and assisting in the region, to just ensure that capability and training to fully utilize the resources that they're bringing on board can then be made most beneficial.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there any more questions? I haven't got any more in the chat. If anybody has a question, if they either want to put their hands up or unmute themselves, they feel free. I can't see any more. If not, thank you very much, Shannon and Sarah. I think it's been a fantastic event, and we really do appreciate. Oh, hold on, one's just popped in from Joanna. How can we, as crisis responders, better assist with trauma counselling for released seafarers and their families? Also, can we contact Sarah for help with company's details? Sarah, you're on mute.
I think that's a really good point that you're making about talking about assisting with trauma counselling, because again, it is being kidnapped and being held and moved around. We've heard from released crew members and seafarers that it's just an exhausting experience. And whilst most seafarers aren't physically injured, especially in the Gulf of Guinea, there is obviously that emotional and intellectual abuse that goes on. I think that ultimately that responsibility, and we've heard from different shipping companies that they have measures in place, especially if they know that their vessels are transiting through the Gulf of Guinea. This is a risk that they take into account, which is why we're talking about it today. But they do have measures in place to support the family in that situation, and it's just that constant support and keeping those lines of communication open. But yeah, that's not something that we deal with as part of Dryad Global, but it is definitely something that I think is an important, that those long effects of being kidnapped that people maybe sort of forget about once seafarers are released. That's an excellent point. And yes, I can put my email in the chat again if you want to reach out with any follow-up questions.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm really appreciative. Okay, any other questions before we formally end? Because I've noticed we are exactly at our time that we said. So can I formally thank Shannon and Sarah again for a fantastic presentation. We, as you can see, are recording it, and it will be available on WISTA-UK.net website next week once we get it up. There is an events page, and it's got all the videos of all the different seminar sessions that we've held since we've had to move online to this wonderful world of Zoom and everything else that's happened with it. The one bonus is we now have everything on video, which we would never have had if we were in person. So the downside is we can't see you, we can't interact with you. The good side is you're now going to have to get your colleagues, or you can watch all this again. So thank you very much. And also, hold on, Rod's coming with something. Regarding Yaya's question, the military used trauma risk management, TRIM, to cope with the aftermath of incidents. And this is also outside the military now. So that's a bit of information for everybody. So can I also formally thank Dryad for sponsoring today and taking part with us. We really do appreciate it. We hope this is the start of a really good ongoing relationship between us all, and we look forward to the next one. And it now just leaves me to people, if you want to unmute, I'm going to stop the recording so we can have a general chat for a few minutes. And if not, we look forward to seeing you in the future.